For years, officers Gregory Calloway and Anthony Miller acted like the law didn't apply to them. Every traffic stop was a setup. Every complaint mysteriously vanished. They operated on intimidation, confident no one would ever push back, until the day they picked the wrong target, a black man walking his German Shepherd through a quiet suburban neighborhood. They assumed he was just another face they could pressure into silence. But when he didn't shrink back, when he calmly questioned their behavior, the situation quickly escalated. Tense words turned into threats, and when his dog instinctively stepped forward, one of the officers reached toward his holster. What they didn't know? That man was Malcolm Hayes, a decorated Delta Force veteran who'd seen more than most could imagine. He wasn't just walking his dog. He was coming home after years of overseas missions where he protected people who never even knew they were in danger. And now, after everything he'd sacrificed, the real danger had followed him home, in the form of two officers who thought their uniforms made them untouchable. But justice was coming, and it would be sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Before we continue, drop a comment with where in the world you're watching from, and hit subscribe if stories like this matter to you. The sun cast long shadows across the peaceful street, its golden rays filtering gently through the leaves above. Rex, the German Shepherd, walked in perfect step beside Malcolm, alert but calm, his leash resting loosely in Malcolm's hand. It was one of those rare afternoons that felt untouched by chaos. For Malcolm, this walk was a ritual, a grounding moment after weeks abroad in dangerous regions, managing high-risk operations. Finally, he was home. All he wanted now was quiet, the familiar scent of grass, the warmth of the sun, the steady rhythm of Rex's paws on the sidewalk. But even in this calm, he felt it, the invisible weight. A curtain twitching, a car slowing a bit too much, a jogger hesitating, unsure. It always happened. Malcolm was trained to notice patterns, to read tension before it sparked. Overseas, those instincts had saved lives, but here, in a place that was supposed to be safe, those same instincts warned him of a different kind of danger. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, it was subtle. It was the way someone clutched their bag a little tighter, or how a neighbor crossed the street last week to avoid walking past him. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone made some people uneasy. The irony? He had risked his life protecting others, had neutralized real threats in the world's most dangerous places. And yet, on his own street, he was the one being watched like a threat. Then, he saw it. A familiar black and white car turned the corner, creeping slowly in his direction. Rex let out a nearly silent growl, just a ripple of sound. Malcolm gently tugged the leash. "Easy," he said quietly. The dog responded at once. The cruiser pulled up beside him, its window down. "Afternoon, sir," came the voice. Malcolm turned, calm and poised. "Afternoon, officer." Calloway leaned on the edge of the window, eyes sharp and unreadable. Miller, his partner, had already stepped out of the car. He stood close, too close to be casual, but just far enough to play innocent if asked. "You live around here?" Calloway asked, voice smooth but rehearsed. "Yes, sir," Malcolm answered plainly. "Huh," Calloway smirked. "Don't think I've seen you before." Malcolm nodded politely. "I've been away on assignment, just got back. I work in overseas security." Miller scoffed. "Security? That's some fancy title for what exactly?" Malcolm let out a soft laugh. "Not quite. I consult on international operations, high-risk protection. I help train professionals on how to stay alive in unpredictable environments." What he didn't say, that he was trained to end threats before they started, that he had seen fear and knew exactly how it moved, and right now it was standing in front of him, wearing a badge. Calloway gave a slow nod, but something in his tone felt off. Well, he said with forced casualness, shifting his stance, we got a call about someone acting suspicious, just doing our job. Malcolm raised an eyebrow, keeping his voice neutral. Didn't know walking a dog counted as suspicious. Calloway gave a crooked smirk. You'd be surprised what sets people off these days. Miller stepped in a little closer, eyes drifting to Rex, the calm, focused German shepherd by Malcolm's side. That's a big dog, Miller noted, pretending to be curious. He trained? Yes, sir, Malcolm answered evenly. For what? Malcolm let the silence linger before replying. Obedience. Protection. He's highly disciplined. Miller gave a slight nod, but his eyes didn't leave the dog. Meanwhile, Calloway shifted again. Gonna need to see some ID, he said, not as a request, but as a thinly veiled command. Malcolm could have challenged that, could have asked why, but he knew the game. Of course, he said calmly, reaching slowly for his wallet. Every move was measured. Rex took half a step closer, just a shift, barely visible, but Malcolm felt it. Whoa, Miller said sharply, eyes locking on the dog. Might want to keep that thing under control. Malcolm's voice stayed steady. He is. He's under control. Calloway let out a short, condescending laugh. Yeah, we'll see. There was something in the way he said it. Not a joke, but a warning. Malcolm retrieved his wallet and held it out. Calloway barely glanced at it before gesturing toward the sidewalk. Step over here for a moment. Just a few questions. Malcolm exhaled slowly. Stay composed. He gave Rex a subtle signal, a barely perceptible tug of the leash. The dog eased into a neutral stance. Then Malcolm stepped forward. That's when everything shifted. His posture was calm, his wallet still extended. Rex's leash stayed steady, but the tension was there. Invisible to most, but not to Malcolm. He felt how the officer's eyes tracked every move, how control pulsed beneath their smirks. Miller took the wallet like he expected to find trouble inside. He flipped it open with a casual arrogance, and when his eyes hit the name on the ID, his expression changed. Well, well, he muttered, showing it to Calloway. Look what we've got. Calloway took it, reading the card without a hint of respect. Delta Force, huh? He said flatly. That's supposed to impress me? Malcolm didn't react. He didn't blink. He knew better than to give them what they wanted. It means I've served, he said simply. And now I work in security consulting. Like I said, Calloway chuckled, shaking his head like it was all a joke. He handed the wallet back, but not before making Malcolm step closer to retrieve it. Another little game of dominance. Malcolm took it back calmly, never breaking eye contact. That's all nice, Calloway drawled, but from what I see, you're still just a guy folks around here don't recognize, and that makes people nervous, so they weren't even pretending anymore. I live here, Malcolm said, voice level. Then you won't mind answering a few more questions, Calloway said, folding his arms. Malcolm didn't budge. I already have. Miller shifted again. Something about his vibe, he said, adjusting his belt. Doesn't sit right. Calloway nodded slowly. Yeah, like he's hiding something. Malcolm took a breath. Steady, controlled. He had faced chaos in war zones. Had walked through ambushes, defused bombs, disarmed enemies who looked him in the eye and wanted him gone. But nothing felt quite like this. This slow, deliberate stripping of dignity in the very place he called home. And Rex knew it. The dog didn't bark, didn't move. But every part of him was engaged. Ears forward, eyes locked, muscles coiled with awareness. He could sense what was about to happen before it even began. Calloway's gaze locked on Rex. You sure you've got that thing under control? He asked, chin motioning toward the dog. Malcolm kept his grip firm, but calm. He's trained. He's fine. Miller took a step closer, narrowing his eyes. Yeah? Trained for what? Protection. Security. He responds to commands. Malcolm said evenly. Calloway gave a slow whistle. Sounds like a dog that could do some real damage. Not sure it's smart to walk something like that through this neighborhood. He's not trained to attack, Malcolm replied, his tone beginning to cool. He's trained to defend. Calloway's smirk grew. Defend from what, exactly? The question wasn't about the dog, and everyone there knew it. Miller exhaled sharply. Big dog, not answering questions, tense energy. I say we bring him in, just to be safe. He stepped in again, close now, deliberately, invading space. Malcolm felt the tension ripple through the leash. Rex hadn't moved, but his body shifted, coiled, alert. There's no need for that, Malcolm said calmly. You've seen my ID. I've cooperated. Miller shrugged. Still don't like your attitude. Then it came. Turn around, Calloway ordered. Hands behind your back, for our safety. Malcolm's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. I haven't done anything wrong, Calloway smirked. Then you won't mind? Miller reached out, grabbing Malcolm's wrist. Too firm, too fast. And that's when it happened. Rex let out a sharp, guttural growl that sliced through the air. Both officers immediately reached for their weapons. Malcolm moved without thinking, deflecting Miller's grip, stepping back just enough, anchoring the leash in place to keep Rex steady. Whoa, whoa, he's reacting to your aggression, Malcolm said, voice low but commanding. Stand down. But they weren't listening. Miller's gun was already drawn, his face flushed with fear masked as authority. Back that dog off, Calloway barked, his own hand hovering above his holster. Rex didn't lunge. He didn't move, but every muscle in his body was tight, waiting. He knew his handler was in danger. Malcolm raised his hands slowly, palms open. I live here. You saw my ID. The address is there. My dog is leashed. I am not resisting. The leash in his hand tightened. Rex was reading every heartbeat, every tremor in the air. This wasn't a routine stop. It had never been one. Then control your dog, Calloway snapped, his voice dropping the last pretense. He is controlled, Malcolm replied, still calm. He hasn't moved. He's trained. The only threat here is your behavior. I don't care what you think, Miller cut in, voice sharp, rising. Control your dog. Malcolm didn't flinch, but inside he knew this had nothing to do with safety. They weren't looking for compliance. They were waiting for a reason. Officers, Malcolm said slowly, I am cooperating. Tell me, what do you actually want right now? Calloway stepped in again, hand twitching near his holster. You think this is a discussion? He hissed. Right now, you're the problem. And that mutt, one wrong move, and he's done. Miller took another half step, boots scraping the pavement. You want to keep talking, or are you going to do what you're told? Rex growled again, deeper this time. Malcolm adjusted his position, a subtle shift that kept both men in his field of vision, one hand anchored on the leash. You're escalating this. I'm standing still. My dog is standing still. The aggression is only coming from you. Stand. Down. Now! Miller shouted. Malcolm could feel the moment breaking, splintering under the weight of ego, fear, and power. Then Calloway barked, Make that mutt sit! Now! Malcolm turned his head slightly, slow, controlled. He didn't raise his voice, and with a single whispered command, he signaled Rex. Command! Rex! Down! At once, Rex lowered himself to the ground, tense but obedient. His muscles coiled, ears back, reading the shift in his handler's voice, sensing this wasn't training, this was real. Miller scoffed. Oh, now he listens. But Calloway wasn't done. His hand hovered lower toward his holster. Shorten the leash. Make sure he can't move. Malcolm clenched his jaw. Slowly, he did as ordered, reeling Rex in tighter, locking the dog by his side, his focus razor sharp. Then it happened. The look. that silent exchange between the officers. A signal. Miller cracked his shoulders, as if preparing for something. "We're done playing around," he said coldly. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Malcolm didn't move. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, voice low, firm. Calloway smiled again, that same smirk dripping with arrogance. "Yeah? And yet, here we are." Malcolm knew exactly what would happen if he turned. He'd be shoved to the ground, accused of resisting, and everything would spiral from there. So he stood still. "Turn around!" Miller barked again, stepping forward. That's when Rex growled, low, deep, and steady. A warning. The officers' hands snapped toward their weapons. "Control your dog!" Miller shouted. "He is controlled!" Malcolm snapped back, the leash still tight in his grip. "Not good enough!" Calloway yelled, hand twitching over his holster. Malcolm felt it, that quiet shift in the air just before everything goes wrong. A silence so loud it roared in his ears. The sunlight seemed to dim. Everything else, the houses, the breeze, the world, disappeared. Miller moved first, a sudden motion toward his sidearm, and Rex reacted. One bark, a flash of muscle. Then the crack of a gunshot split the air. The leash yanked in Malcolm's hand, and Rex stumbled. Time slowed. Malcolm didn't hear the follow-up commands, didn't register the neighbors frozen behind curtains. All he saw was his dog, his partner, his guardian, falling. "No!" The word left his mouth before he even hit the pavement. Rex collapsed into him, heavy, warm, trembling. Blood soaked Malcolm's hands in seconds. He pressed down, trying to stop it, trying to do something. "Stay with me. Stay, Rex," he whispered, the words cracking in his throat. "I got you, buddy. I got you." Rex let out a soft, pained whimper. His body twitched in Malcolm's arms. His breathing was shallow, unsteady, like he was trying to stay, trying to hold on, for Malcolm. Miller still held his weapon up, his face locked in a mask of false authority. Calloway simply muttered, "Told you he was a liability." But Malcolm didn't hear them, didn't see them. All his focus was on Rex, the loyal soul who had followed him through war zones, protected him without hesitation, stood between him and danger more times than he could count. Now he was the one trying to protect him. "You're okay," Malcolm whispered, stroking his head. "You're okay. Just hold on. Stay with me." Rex's eyes searched his face, alert, faithful, waiting for the next command. But there was no more battlefield, no more mission, just pain and goodbye. With a final exhale, Rex went still, and something in Malcolm, something essential, shattered. Malcolm lifted his head, his eyes burning, his hands slick with blood, Rex's blood. His breathing came rough, jagged, shaking his frame. But it wasn't grief that consumed him. It was something else, something older, something fierce, something that had been buried for far too long. "You!" His voice dropped into something primal, a low growl that didn't sound like it came from a man, but from something forged in war and loss. He stood, fast, fierce, fists clenched, posture squared. "You killed him." Miller flinched. Calloway didn't. He just smirked like none of it mattered. "That's on you, tough guy. Should have kept your mutt under control." And that was it. Malcolm lunged, not thinking, not planning, just moving, giving in to the rage tearing through his body. But before he could reach them, the crackle of electricity slammed into his back. Pain exploded. His entire body locked. The taser hit him like lightning, blinding, paralyzing, stripping every ounce of control. He crashed to the ground, muscles twitching, gasping for breath, and then came the boots, crushing him down. Shouts, orders, guns pointed, hands grabbing at his arms. "Stay down! Don't move! Hands behind your back!" Malcolm wanted to fight. Everything in him screamed to fight, but he didn't. because they had already killed his best friend. And if he moved now, they'd end him too. His body still trembled, still burned, but he forced his hands behind his back, his fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood. A knee pressed between his shoulder blades. The pavement scraped against his face, and Calloway leaned in. "Yeah, that's where you belong." Malcolm didn't cry out in pain. He roared, raw, broken, furious. "You killed him!" His voice cracked, tore, shattered. "You murdered him!" But no one was listening. No one ever listened. Calloway jerked him upright. The cuffs dug deep into his wrists. Miller just stood by, watching, calm, detached. They shoved Malcolm toward the cruiser. His legs moved, but he wasn't walking. He was burning. His grief had turned to fire, and every step toward that car only fed it. And then the door slammed shut, alone, trapped. His breathing echoed off the metal walls, harsh, furious, still full of fight, because this wasn't over. Far from it. As the vehicle rolled forward in silence, the steel bit into his wrists with every jolt of the road. His jaw ached, his muscles still spasmed from the taser, but none of it compared to the pain in his chest. Rex was gone, and he hadn't been able to stop it. He could still see those eyes, alert, loyal, waiting for a command that never came. And for the first time in years, Malcolm Hayes, Delta Force, had felt powerless. The cruiser jerked to a stop. The door clicked open. Calloway's hand reached in, but Malcolm wasn't broken, not yet. Behind the fury, behind the grief, something had begun to solidify. Steel, focus, resolve. They thought it was over. They were wrong. Calloway yanked Malcolm from the car like he was dragging a discarded object, not a man. The motion twisted through his shoulders with a jolt of pain, but Malcolm forced his body to steady itself. No shaking, no reaction. Not here, not now. They wanted another outburst. They weren't going to get it. Miller climbed out lazily, adjusting his belt with a smirk that said everything. He knew there'd be no consequences. "Welcome to your new home," he muttered, shoving Malcolm toward the entrance of the precinct. "Try not to get too comfortable." Malcolm said nothing. His eyes stayed forward. His mind ran like a machine behind glass, quiet on the outside, storming within. The booking was a blur. Cuffs snapped off, fingerprints taken, blood still on his hands. Rex's blood. They took his photo like it was just another formality, as if the horror of the last few hours was just paperwork now. The holding cell smelled like sweat and old regret, a stale little cage for men who'd already been judged long before they walked through the door. Malcolm didn't sit, didn't pace, didn't speak. He just waited. The fury didn't leave. It evolved, from fire to something colder, something more focused. And then the door burst open. Heels clacked like gunfire, voice like steel. "Take your hands off my brother." "Jasmine." Malcolm exhaled. Just once. She stormed into the room like she owned the floor. Power suit sharp as a blade, fury in every step. The officers who had dragged him in didn't dare move. "You're done," she snapped, shoving papers into one of their chests. "Unless you're looking for the kind of lawsuit that makes national headlines, you're going to release him. Now." Calloway leaned in the doorway, arms folded, smug as ever. "Relax, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding. We were chatting with your brother." Jasmine turned so fast the air shifted around her. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you're calling it? You shot his dog, slammed him to the ground, locked him in a cage." Miller chimed in, grinning. "He got aggressive, ma'am. We had to keep things from escalating." Her laugh was ice. "Oh, it escalated. Just not the way you planned, and now you're going to pay for it." Calloway shrugged. "Could have gone worse." Then, for the first time since it all started, Malcolm spoke, low, cold, controlled. "It will." And for just a second, just one, The officer's posturing cracked. Calloway quickly recovered, jerking his chin toward the exit. "Take him home, counselor. But if I were you, I'd tell him to keep his head down. This city doesn't like troublemakers." Jasmine didn't answer. She just took Malcolm's wrist, not with fear, but strength. A steady anchor in a place designed to break people. "Let's go," she whispered. Malcolm walked out with her, past the walls that erased him, past the men who thought they'd won. But the night air didn't feel like freedom. Outside, Jasmine ran a hand over her face, her rage melting into something deeper. Sorrow. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know what he meant to you." Malcolm didn't answer. He couldn't. There weren't words for what had been taken. She kept going. "Let me fight this. The courts, the media, every legal path we've got. It won't work," Malcolm said. She froze. "Malcolm." He met her eyes. Calm, steady, resigned. "They've already rewritten it. The reports, the footage, the narrative. It's over, Jasmine. Not for them, for us." He wasn't bitter. He was clear. The system wouldn't bring justice. It never had. And in that moment, Malcolm released something, the hope that it ever would. And in its place, something else took root, colder, sharper, unstoppable. Days later, the house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings rest or peace. This was a hollow silence, the kind that echoed, the kind that pressed in from the walls, curled under the skin, and reminded you every second that something was missing. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, his hands loosely wrapped around a coffee mug he hadn't touched. On the counter, Rex's leash lay coiled, untouched, waiting. The absence was everywhere. It filled the corners of the room like fog, no steady footsteps, no calm breathing at his side, just nothing. Jasmine stood near the window, arms crossed, watching him. "You haven't slept," she said. No reply. "You haven't eaten either." Still silence. She stepped closer. "I know what you're thinking." That made him exhale, a dry, humorless sound that barely passed for a laugh. He looked up at her. His eyes were hollow. "Do you?" Jasmine faltered, just for a second. They'd always understood each other without words. But this wasn't the brother she knew. Something had changed, something fundamental. "I know you," she said carefully. "I know how you think. If something's broken, you fix it. If there's a threat, you neutralize it. That's why you were good at what you did." Her voice softened. "But this isn't a battlefield, Malcolm." His jaw tightened. "Feels like one." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "The system is slow, but it works. We've already filed. I've got journalists, watchdogs, people paying attention. They can't bury this forever." He looked at her. "They already did." "No, they didn't." "The internal investigation closed this morning." Jasmine froze. "What?" "No charges, no disciplinary action, no fault." His voice was flat, but his eyes burned. "They called it justified force." She turned away, pressing her hand to her forehead like she could physically hold in her anger. "Of course they did," she muttered. "Of course they—" She spun back toward him. "That doesn't mean it's over. We appeal. We go public. We—" "Jasmine," he said, quiet but final. She shook her head. No, you don't get to say that. Not after what they did. Not after what they took. This isn't over." Malcolm leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, his gaze locked on hers. "They took everything from me in seconds," he said. "And now you're asking me to wait, to hope that the same system that already cleared them will suddenly decide to care?" His voice stayed calm, too calm. "You're telling me to sit still, and maybe, months from now, someone might get a slap on the wrist, or resign quietly, maybe." He paused. "But we both know how this goes." Jasmine's throat tightened. Her voice trembled. "We have to try." "I did try." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I tried when I said I lived here, when I showed them my ID, when I stayed calm, when I didn't resist, when I begged them to see me as human." He looked down, then back up. "I tried, Jasmine, and Rex still died, and I still ended up in a cell." She sat across from him, searching his face as if looking for a sliver of doubt. "Malcolm, what are you saying?" He tilted his head, thinking, measuring, then, "I think you already know." Her hands gripped the table edge. "Don't do this, please." "I'm not asking you to be okay with it," he said. "I'm just telling you where I stand and where this is going." Jasmine's voice cracked. "If you go down this path, there's no coming back." Malcolm met her eyes, and what she saw there wasn't rage. It was clarity, unshakable, inevitable. "I don't want to come back." Then silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was decided. The silence between them hung heavy, not awkward, but full of all the things that hadn't been said. Jasmine finally exhaled and stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her blazer with steady hands. "I'll call you tomorrow." Malcolm nodded once. She hesitated at the door. Her fingers twitched slightly, like they wanted to reach for him, to pull him back from whatever place his mind had gone. But instead, she turned and walked out. He waited until her car engine faded into the night. Then he rose. At the counter, his hand hovered over Rex's leash. He brushed his fingers along the worn leather. Familiar, trusted, heavy with meaning. Slowly, he picked it up and coiled it in his hand. Not as a leash anymore. It would never serve that purpose again. Now, it was a reminder, a symbol, a vow. The war had already started, and Malcolm was ready. The bar sat on the edge of the city, far enough from clean streets and respectable neighborhoods that uniforms meant little. Here, no one cared who you were. Malcolm had been watching for days. Calloway was always the same. Same barstool, same whiskey, same casual arrogance. The way he leaned too close to women, laughed too loudly, drank too much. He believed nothing could touch him, that he was untouchable. He was wrong. Malcolm sat in the corner, hood drawn low, his glass untouched. He watched. He waited. Predictability was weakness, and Calloway was nothing if not predictable. He always parked in the same dark alley behind the bar. No cameras, no street lights, just shadows. Tonight would be different. Calloway stumbled toward the back exit, muttering, laughing to himself. He shoved through the door and into darkness. Malcolm followed, silent, focused, every movement exact. Calloway, drunk and distracted, fumbled for his keys. They clattered to the ground. He bent to grab them, and that's when it began. Malcolm struck, not with rage, but precision. A blow to the ribs dropped Calloway to the ground. His skull hit pavement with a thud that silenced everything. "What the—" He never finished. Another strike to the gut left him gasping, scrambling like a man who'd never been on the receiving end of fear. Malcolm dragged him up and slammed him down again. Who are—" Malcolm leaned in close, his voice a whisper that cut deeper than any blow. "You don't get to know. Not yet." Calloway trembled. Malcolm released him, let him drop. He crouched beside him, eyes cold, voice calm. "You like being judge, jury, and executioner, right?" he said quietly. "Easy job when the system always takes your side." Calloway choked, his breath ragged. "You're dead. You hear me? You—" Malcolm's next move was faster, calculated. A single hit to silence the bluff. Blood hit the ground. That's for every man and woman you've humiliated, every person who didn't have the power to fight back. Calloway groaned, curling inward. Malcolm waited. Let the pain settle. Then, his voice dropped even lower. "This is the last time you walk away untouched." He stood over him, steady as stone. "Because starting tonight, I'm taking everything. Your badge, your reputation, your safety, bit by bit." Calloway whimpered. "You'll never know when, never know how, but you'll wake up every day knowing I'm still out here, watching, waiting." Malcolm leaned in one last time. "This isn't revenge," he said quietly. "It's justice." And then he vanished into the night. As suddenly as he had appeared, the man was gone. Calloway lay on the cold pavement, bleeding, shaking, his pulse pounding in his ears louder than the street noise nearby. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. He wasn't feared. He was hunted. Pain wasn't something he was used to. It was something he delivered, not something he endured. But now, every breath felt like broken glass in his lungs. His ribs throbbed, his vision swam, and his ears rang with the echo of the words that had shaken him more than the blows ever could. "This is the last time you walk away from something like this. After tonight, I'm going to take everything from you." He believed it. Every word. Calloway pushed himself up with shaking arms, dragging his back against the brick wall just to sit upright. He fumbled for his phone, hands slick with blood. The screen was cracked but functional. The line rang twice. "Calloway?" came Miller's groggy voice. "It's 1 a.m. What the—" "I need backup," Calloway cut in, breath ragged. A pause. "Where are you?" "Back alley, behind OJ's." Miller's tone changed immediately. "What happened?" Calloway swallowed. "Someone jumped me, didn't see his face. But he hesitated, something unfamiliar in his throat. He knew me, Miller. He knew everything." Another pause, this one longer. "Everything?" Calloway nodded, even though no one could see him. "He said he's going to destroy me." Miller scoffed, but something uneasy lingered in his voice. Probably just some drunk blowing off steam. "No," Calloway whispered. This was different. This guy wasn't angry. He was certain. 10 minutes later, Miller's unmarked car rolled into the alley. He stepped out in jeans and a hoodie, badge clipped to his belt, hand resting near his sidearm. "What happened to you?" he muttered, taking in the bruises. "You think I did this to myself?" Miller glanced around. "You said you didn't see him?" "No, he moved like—" Calloway shook his head. Military, fast, no hesitation. He knew exactly what he was doing. "So what? Ex-soldier with a grudge?" "He wasn't just some random vet, Miller. He knew who I was. What we've done." Miller's face tightened. "Then we find him." Calloway laughed, but it came out hollow. "How? We don't even have a face." Miller stepped closer. "If someone comes after us, we shut it down. That's the rule. He made a mistake. He left you alive. That means he gave us an opening." Calloway slowly nodded, but the certainty he once carried was already cracking. Miller pulled out his phone. "I'll make a few calls, quiet ones." Calloway nodded again, but his mind wasn't in the alley anymore. It was back in that moment, hearing those words, feeling that presence, knowing this wasn't over, because it wasn't. Across the street, engine off, headlights dark, Malcolm watched. He had expected them to respond. What interested him was how, and it was exactly what he had predicted. Panic, desperation, rage wrapped in fear. They weren't filing reports. They weren't opening cases. They weren't following protocol. This wasn't law enforcement. This was retaliation. Calloway was still limping, his posture stiff with pain, his face bruised. Malcolm's camera lens followed every step, because this wasn't just about vengeance. It was about truth, exposure. They had built their power on silence and shadows. Now Malcolm was dragging them into the light. It wasn't just the beating that broke Calloway. It was the unknown, the fear of being overpowered by someone he couldn't see, couldn't control, couldn't stop. For the first time, he wasn't the one delivering fear. He was living in it. And it shook him deeper than any bruise ever could. They pulled up outside an old boxing gym on the edge of the precinct, the kind of place that didn't need advertising. This wasn't about sport. It was about survival. It wasn't surprising. Calloway and Miller had a long history of targeting strong, outspoken black men in their district, the ones who didn't back down, didn't lower their eyes, didn't flinch. Men like Taryn Briggs. The gym door creaked open, and there he was. Briggs stood in the doorway, built like a linebacker, wiping sweat from his brow. Once an amateur fighter, now a mentor for local youth, Briggs was one of the few who had openly challenged Calloway and Miller, even filing formal complaints 2 years ago after a violent arrest. The charges had been buried, just like the bruises that covered his ribs, just like the gash above his eye, just like the wrists that had been swollen from deliberately over-tightened cuffs. And now, here they were again. Malcolm watched through the lens of his camera as Calloway and Miller approached, shoulders stiff, expressions sharp. Calloway stood too close, arms crossed, chin lifted, the kind of posture that dared a man to react. Miller lingered behind him, shifting his weight, checking over his shoulder like he knew someone was watching. Briggs didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give an inch. He just leaned on the doorframe, unimpressed. Calloway said something sharp. Briggs answered with a smirk. Miller stepped forward, aggressive, confrontational, but Briggs stood tall, unmoved. Malcolm adjusted his zoom. Every motion was a confession, every posture a page in their unspoken script. Calloway reached out, but this time, even he hesitated. He turned without another word, signaling Miller to follow. Malcolm exhaled slowly. That was the plan. They had no suspects, no clues, no leads. So they went after what scared them most. Strength, not guilt, presence. They were scanning the streets for men who wouldn't break, waiting for someone to flinch. Cowards. Briggs muttered something and walked back inside, unshaken. But Calloway and Miller weren't finished. Malcolm followed, 3 cars behind, always outside their sight line. Next stop, an apartment complex on the east side. Dwayne Carter. Another name, another story. 6 months ago, he was pulled over for a so-called equipment violation. The night ended with him face down on the pavement, accused of reaching for a weapon that didn't exist. He was beaten, booked, and charged with assaulting an officer, even though the only bruises that night were on him. Malcolm watched as they marched up to his door and knocked hard enough to shake the frame. It was early. Carter answered in a t-shirt, half awake, blinking at the officers on his doorstep. Calloway didn't wait. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside, uninvited. Carter stiffened, confused, irritated, but he didn't resist. He knew better. Miller followed close behind, blocking the door, trapping him. Malcolm's camera captured it all through the kitchen window. The body language, the tone, the pressure. Carter raised his hand slightly, a silent symbol of peace. But Calloway's eyes were already scanning his arms, his chest, his size. They were doing the math, not of guilt, but of intimidation. That's when Carter did something unexpected. He laughed. Calloway's face twisted instantly. Miller moved closer, trying to erase the sound of that defiance with presence. Malcolm's grip tightened around the camera, but he didn't move. Not yet. This wasn't about stopping them. This was about exposing them. He had what he needed. They were unraveling, and every move they made was one more piece of the story. Malcolm watched as the car made loops through the city. He knew the pattern. He knew their rhythm. No interviews, no reports, no procedures. Just fear, masked as control. They were out of leads, so they were swinging in the dark, targeting men they once bruised, once arrested, once tried to silence. But fear makes you sloppy, and desperation, that makes you visible. Malcolm knew it before they did. They were chasing strength, and missing the threat right behind them. They thought they were being subtle. But Malcolm had been watching, waiting, preparing. He saw it in the hesitation when Miller turned onto the familiar street, in the way Calloway leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the house came into view. They were coming for him, and they had no idea. That was exactly what he wanted. For 2 nights, Malcolm had set the stage, not with obvious security, no cameras hanging from corners, no visible alarms. That would have made them cautious. Instead, he created a scene, a half-finished bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, unopened mail scattered near the sink, a gun safe cracked open just enough to suggest carelessness. Everything crafted to make him look exposed, distracted, vulnerable. The cameras, of course, were there, hidden in plain sight, positioned exactly where no arrogant officer would ever think to look. The porch light glowed, the side gate remained unlocked. An invitation. Malcolm sat in his living room, breathing slow, phone resting on his knee. The knock came, sharp, demanding. He rose, opened the door. Calloway and Miller stood there, the same smug confidence on their faces, as if the last week hadn't unraveled everything they thought they controlled. "Evening," Malcolm said calmly. "Something I can help you with?" Calloway smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we come in?" Malcolm leaned against the frame, keeping his posture relaxed. "That depends. Got a warrant? Or you just here to take another shot?" Miller gave a short laugh. "You hiding something?" Malcolm tilted his head, a flicker of amusement in his voice. "Not at all. I just like to keep things legal. You understand?" Calloway stepped forward. "Yeah. Funny thing about legal, isn't it?" Then, as Malcolm expected, it happened. Calloway shoved him hard into the house. Malcolm stumbled, knocking into a table. The whiskey bottle clattered to the floor. The door slammed shut behind them. Miller shook his head. "You know what's funny, Malcolm? We've been thinking, the guy who did this," he tapped his bruised ribs, "he wasn't some random street punk. He moved like he was trained." Calloway circled him like a predator. "Not many people move like that, unless they had a certain background." "Delta Force, maybe?" Miller added with a sneer. Malcolm let the silence hang, just long enough to sting. Then he laughed, deep, real. "You think I did that to you?" he asked, smiling. "Calloway, if I had, you wouldn't have walked away." Calloway's smirk twitched. Miller stiffened, but Malcolm's tone shifted. "Look, I don't know what happened to you two," he said, rubbing his jaw like a tired man ready to be done with the conversation. "But I had nothing to do with it." Calloway's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, well, we don't really believe you." And then it began. The first punch slammed into Malcolm's ribs. Brutal, efficient. He grunted, staggered, but didn't resist. The second hit caught his jaw. His head whipped sideways. He let it happen. Didn't fight, didn't defend, played the part. Calloway grabbed him by the shirt, yanked him upright. "Not so tough now, are you?" Malcolm coughed, blood on his lip. "You done?" he rasped. "For now," Miller muttered. Calloway shoved him against the wall one last time. "Stay out of our way, because if we find out you had anything to do with this," he leaned in, "you're not gonna like how it ends." Then they left. The door slammed, and Malcolm stayed on the floor, not because he was broken, but because he was calculating. Minutes passed. Then he stood, wincing as he moved to his laptop. He pulled up the camera feeds. There it was, crystal clear, everything. The forced entry, the threats, the violence. No ambiguity. They had walked into their own trap, fists first. Malcolm watched it again. Every frame, every movement, every arrogant word. His bruises would fade. But this was forever. Malcolm didn't sleep that night. He didn't need to. The pain in his ribs was manageable. What fueled him was colder, sharper. By morning, the footage had already been transferred to 3 encrypted backups, one on a drive stored off-site, one in the cloud under an anonymous account, and one sent, not to the police, not to a lawyer, but to someone who would make it impossible to ignore. A journalist named Alana Drew. She didn't work for a major network anymore, not after she published a piece that embarrassed 2 police unions and a city council. Now she ran her own platform, unfiltered, uncompromised, and unafraid. Malcolm included a simple note. If you're still interested in justice, this is your story. Officers Calloway and Miller. The house, the time. Everything is real, and it's just the beginning. He hit send. Then he waited. It didn't take long. By noon, the video was live. No commentary, no music, just raw truth. 2 men in plain clothes forcing their way into a private home. No warrant, no pause, no hesitation, a beating, a threat, and the arrogance to believe it would never matter. Except now, it did. The footage exploded across the internet, on phones, on news feeds. Every corner of the city was talking. It wasn't just that the video existed, it was who the victim was. Malcolm Ford, veteran, community mentor, 0 criminal record. And still, they came for him. The silence that had once protected men like Calloway and Miller cracked. Then it crumbled. By 6 p.m., the department issued a statement. Pending investigation, administrative leave. The usual words, hollow, but Malcolm wasn't done. That night, he posted another message. This isn't about me, it's about everyone they ever silenced. If they've come for you, tell your story. We're not alone anymore. And one by one, the voices rose. Taryn Briggs, Dwayne Carter, a woman named Lacey Holloway, who had been harassed during a stop 2 years prior, laughed out of internal affairs. All of them. All those stories once buried under fear or shame. They started to surface because Malcolm hadn't just exposed brutality, he had broken the illusion. He made it safe to speak, and now Calloway and Miller weren't hunting. They were surrounded by the truth, by witnesses, by something they could no longer control.